Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 531. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com. And today, my guests are Dr. Jonathan Ball from Stranger Fiction and GMB, also known as Gregory. Together, they're the creative team behind The Eye Collector, a new cosmic horror series from Image Comics. The story begins with a strange and unsettling idea. During the Apollo 10 mission, humans make wishes over the moon, and that act attracts the attention of an ancient being. What follows is not just a monster story, but a surreal, multi-generational horror about desire, perception, and what people are willing to trade for the things they secretly want most. Image Comics has described The Eye Collector as a kaleidoscopic, Lovecraftian thrill ride, and Jonathan has said each issue is designed to stand alone as its own experience while also feeding into a larger story that moves from the moon to Earth to a strange future. Gregory also called it an experiment in comic storytelling, the kind of book where you look at the page and the page looks back. So today we're talking about cosmic horror, collaboration, experimental comics, and what happens when a story asks not just what you see, but what seeing costs. Jonathan and Gregory, how you doing?
We're doing great.
What seeing costs is a great way to put it. And, I love that idea of what seeing costs, because it is very much, that sort of theme that kept winding its way into things.
The whole thing starts off with, the story begins with Apollo 10 and wishes over the moon. So where did that idea come from?
I was really interested. Well, the moon, the Eye Collector is an amalgamation of the Sandman, the Boogeyman, and the Man in the Moon.
Yeah, we each have different answers. So we'll each give you our different answers.
Yeah, and as that story developed a lot, and we kept just sort of working. The thing that you got to understand about this particular issue is that although it's issue number 1, it's the 6th one that we made. So we had made a sort of series of 5 issues that was a story arc, and then we decided to do this standalone story where we wanted to just sort of have a bit more information about not really the origins of the Eye Collector, but just sort of get a little bit into the idea of, well, what was he doing before all this happened? And because of that, chronologically, it's the first thing that happens, and it just sort of made sense later on, we felt, to put it up as the first issue instead of where we kind of, instead of when we made it, just arbitrarily having it in that position. And so what had happened sort of prior to writing this first issue then is we'd developed 5 issues, and it had become more and more important visually in what Gregory was doing, that the moon really mattered. The fact that he was the man of the moon was really starting to take an emphasis that I hadn't originally thought about. I had originally felt the Sandman aspect would be more important, or the Boogeyman aspect, but it's really the Man in the Moon aspect.
Well, yeah. From that.
There's no other Sandman comics, so I wouldn't be concerned about that. But the Man in the Moon thing became so much more important as we were making those first 5, issues. So that by the time we kind of end up doing this one, I really just wanted to delve a bit fully into that Man in the Moon. And I thought, well, if he's the Man in the Moon, people would encounter him when they went to the moon. But of course, I didn't want to really play around too much with the Apollo, like with history that much. Apollo 11 has, it seemed too obvious. But I knew that Apollo 10 was the rehearsal mission. They had done people who don't know, the Apollo 10 mission was everything up to landing on the moon. So they went close to the moon, they circled it, they went down as if they were going to land, and then didn't land. They sort of stopped short, in a manner of speaking. And there was a problem that occurred, this sort of mysterious malfunction that took place, and then it ended up not quite being a disaster. It got resolved, and so on. But I thought there's some interesting transcripts, and some of the lines in this issue are actually pulled from the transcripts. And then, of course, some of the dates matter to the transcripts. And of course, everything else is, absolutely deranged and unrelated, because I wanted to just kind of quickly do like three sort of things. So one was take this idea that everything that's happening in the eye collector has this semblance of tie to the world that we know, but really quickly departs from that world. Because by the time you get into like issue 7 or 8, this world is madness. And the idea that it would have any relationship to how logically things unfold in the normal world is gone. But emotionally, it's still working in that way. And so I wanted to kind of like start in I wanted to basically get to the idea that as soon as this eye collector takes an interest in the world again, everything goes off the rails. And up until that point, we're pulling from history. But then once he comes in, everything's a free for all. It can go anywhere. He can do anything. We can be any kind of place we want to be in this story, and visually speaking, and so on and so forth. And so
I'll say,
it's sort of a complex of things.
From a revisionist history standpoint, if Apollo 11 arrives on the moon, they'd have to find him there, but they didn't.
Yes.
So it makes more sense that he was stirred up by the Apollo 10 mission, because they didn't find the eye collector. But one of the things that we were trying to do here was good writing. It really comes down to is good writing is rewriting. And as we were writing, we got to the 5th issue of the eye collector as we were making it. And when the idea of how to bridge a past and a present together came about, I said we should have a one-shot issue that is all about the eye collector's origin. And then once we made that issue, we realized it's actually better at the beginning of the story, because our story also ends, a slight spoiler alert, ends back on the moon. So there is a complete circle then, and there's actually a visual of a complete circle later in the story that is really important. So it just became a way to have the story rhyme with itself,
which is something it was missing, I think, before when we were. So it ended up being a strong standalone issue. We felt it was the place we almost we kept telling people to meet, because for a period of time we had some sort of some kind of indie issues, let's say, that we were kind of selling at cons and things, like early copies of the eye collector, and we would use this one often, even though it was the 6th one. It was like, if anybody wasn't interested in, didn't know if it was a book for them, and maybe they weren't interested in like reading 5 issues of it or something, we were like, well, take this one.
It was the perfect sample issue. If you like what's in this, everything else that follows will not be too weird, will not be too strange, will not be too propulsive, will not be too repulsive if you like this issue. However, if you were to read issue 2 as issue 1, by issue 3, you might go, oh shit, I didn't sign up for this. And that was kind of something that we wanted not to be the case. We didn't want to surprise somebody. I think the promise of the premise is important. And so if it's called the eye collector, we better have someone collect some eyes right away. And whose eyes better to collect than the astronauts, whose perspective is so much different than anybody else's. Like, what a tantalizing thing to take first when you contact humanity.
And then the other thing that I think just simply kind of comes into play with it all is we wanted, although it's probably unorthodox, like we wanted a first issue that would really just be a complete story, and where hopefully it is satisfying you enough with enough of a complete kind of beginning, middle, end. It's not it's sort of it's not a cliffhanger in the sense that it's a complete little story in one issue, but it is sort of making you maybe hopefully want to know what this guy's going to do next, this eye collector. Weirdly, by the second issue, you start a new story arc.
Yeah, but if a speculator picked up the book and they were only buying issue 1, and then they happened to read it instead of slab it, they might go, wow, that's kind of a cool story all at once. Maybe I should buy this and read it like comics are supposed to be read.
And it just seems like more of an intro to everything by the time we were done. Because again, we made 12 issues of this book prior to Image picking the book up. So at that point where we'd been sitting on 12 issues for some time, we just had the luxury to think a bit about, well, what if we reorganized it a little bit? Or, what might be a better organization? And we didn't make a lot of major changes, but that kind of moving 6 to 1, it just, as Gregory said, it just weirdly perfectly worked. And also it just has more eye collector in it, like the second issue, which is
No
was originally the
spoilers.
first issue.
No
Well,
spoilers.
it just doesn't have as much of the monster in it immediately. It's sort of there's a lot of things that he's doing, and
Okay,
he
if
is
we're
in
going to
there.
spoil it, I want to say something. Then the issue 2,
Well,
right,
issue 2, yeah,
builds up to the eye collector's arrival. And when you see him for the first time through the eyes of the child, we also thought it was better that the reader know how much more dangerous he was. And sort of like the Hitchcock idea of the bomb under the table, that if the first time the kid sees him, he thinks, oh, this guy is creepy and scary looking, and I see him a little for what he isn't. He has only barely scratched the surface of how dangerous this thing knocking at his front door really is. And the reader would know, but the character would not, which makes that experience of reading the book much more suspenseful.
Yeah, that second issue introduces us to who's this child Nathan, who's going to be our main character, one of our main characters for the next 5 issues there. And but there's a lot of like things that happen to kind of build up to the eye collector appearing in that issue, and it just seems to work. As Gregory said, it ended up working a lot better if the reader already knew who the eye collector was. It has just a weirdly, I think, just like that this child doesn't have the single smallest clue as to what he needs to be afraid of.
Barney, I know you're a fan of kids' books. Issue 2 is a little bit more like the monster at the end of the book.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about the monster at the end of the book a lot.
Don't get there. Yeah.
You know what's funny about that, Gregory? I don't know if I ever said this to you, but that was
we talk about it a lot.
Inspirations. Yeah.
You always want it to be the reader's fault that the monster showed up.
It's a weird series to talk about because, I kind of, when I talk about it, I'm talking about it like the whole 12 issues are in my head, and I can think about how, like, in 2, we're setting up something in 7, and 1, there's a thing that's resonates in 12, and so it's hard sometimes to know what to talk about and what not to talk about. But, I really hope people, follow this strange thing. Like if you like issue 1, and you think it's weird, let me promise you that it gets immediately weirder, as it goes.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome, and thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. Was there anything that you guys had in your previous work that you said, it doesn't fit in here, but I'm going to save it one day for something really cool? Did you have anything that you used from your previous work that you
I can speak about Jonathan to answer this question, which he loves if I speak about him, right? I'm going to speak about Jonathan. Jonathan is a really great structuralist when it comes to thinking about a project. So he will set rules and parameters inside of the project, and they become unbreakable rails that help guide it deeper down what the idea is. He's very good at that, and he's a really good collaborator in that way. Just nod sagely right now, Jonathan. And so it's very different when we were working on Last Breeds and another project of his called She-Wolf, where we had very different visual parameters that we had set. And with the Eye Collector, he broke with some of his normal, I have an idea to begin with and let's go. And instead, he would write a loose paragraph about what he thought should go on the page. And then he would always follow that up with, unless you can make something cooler. And so we would just play with that idea of, can I outdo the script visually?
I don't know if I told you this, Gregory, but when I started this project, and when I was scripting this project, and I was thinking about working with trying to find, because I had this idea for some time, and eventually I settled on the idea that maybe it would be a good project to do with Gregory, who I'd been looking for a project to do with for some time, and but I knew my sort of joke I would make to Lyndon, our letterer collaborator on this book, is my joke was sort of, I know Gregory won't draw what I tell him to draw. So my game in the script is going to be, can I think of something so cool that he has to draw it? Where like I was often thinking like, can I beat him? Like, can I write something that he has to draw because it's that cool? Or is he going to beat me and find something cooler to draw? And I feel like
So the Valley of Empty Dolls' Heads. I was like, well, we got to do that. There's no changing that. Yeah, it's no changing that.
Dolls' heads.
But one of the things that happened as a result of this push-pull a little bit, because I was working, like I said, on She-Wolf, where he had some very clear parameters of how things needed to be structured, and I was happy to play along in those regards. So on the Eye Collector, I didn't want to follow as many rules. But the Eye Collector as a character also does not follow the regular rules of comic storytelling. And that developed out of the idea of, what can I do to surprise Jonathan? What can I have the character do that he could not possibly have written, because the script associated with a hand going in front and behind a panel and reaching around and causing a ripple, he wouldn't have thought of, because he's not designing a page that way. And so I tried to trip him up to be like, oh yeah, you think it's like that? It's like this, man. And because we're sitting across from each other, it's not quite as adversarial as you might imagine. If that had to go by email, it'd be a lot worse, right? But instead it was like, hey, take a look at this. Isn't this cool? So.
And the other just simple thing I got to say with this book that I think is unusual for a comic, just a comic, is the Eye Collector. Again, one of the associations that he has is the Sandman, or the Dream Man, as he's often called in songs. But he's really a parasite on dreams. And one of the things, therefore, I feel like there's a level where it's too easy for the reader to start trying to separate things out into reality and dreams. And I wanted to make it as immediately clear as possible. In issue 1, 2, 3, just keep hitting, building on this idea that there is no difference between reality and dreams. You can't separate one of these out as real and one of them out as fake. This world that they're in, the normal sort of world, is incredibly strange. It's incredibly strange to us, but not to them. This is just how their world is. There's no, this is real, this is false, this is hallucination, this is true. There's even thematically that even starts to come out of as a thing the Eye Collector talks about. He doesn't.
At one point they visit an art show that eviscerates people, and no one finds it strange.
Yeah, they're not happy about it, but that's what they signed. But there's a level where that's just what the show is, and I wanted fundamentally a couple things to be clear, I think, throughout the series, and I think Gregory's art style is really valuable in this kind of way. But I want just there to be this. One of the things, as you get into the Eye Collector's early issues, it really becomes more about this child, Nathan, and how he's trying to grow up in this house that has been infiltrated by the Eye Collector, and he's gotten the attention of the Eye Collector, just like that those astronauts got its attention over the moon. There's sort of this trend of it putting its attentions on things, and I really just wanted part of that traumatic experience for that child to be related to the way that people just find things normal. Like if you're sort of inside of a traumatic experience or a bad situation, particularly as a child, you don't realize that there are other ways that things should be. And going to someone's house is almost like entering another world. in those sorts of scenarios. You're like, what? Like not everyone's house is like this, And I just feel like that disorienting notion that you could step outside of your experience of reality and enter into someone else's like little world, and be disoriented, but still sort of have the understanding that this is also a real world, is really something I felt was important to the concept of the eye collector, because he's very much this monster who collects points of view and perspectives, and he feels sorry for humans who are stuck in one point of view. He wants to help them find other points of view. He wants to help them see what's wrong with their point of view. He thinks he's helping. Is the, I think, great villainous irony of
That's why he
the eye
smiles
collector.
so much in the book. He's just trying to be so helpful.
Yeah, and he's asking in that first issue, when one of the great moments for me in it is where I think the art and the writing and everything started to come together. Is the mission is going badly now that the eye collector's involved, and things are spinning out of control, and the astronaut is sort of talking to himself, staticky, breaking up what he's saying, and he's saying, okay, this is just hallucination. Again, I want to just bring up immediately this normal objection. It's a hallucination. This isn't real. Let's focus on the mission. And the eye collector, comes in. Oh, you got a mission? Can I help? And again, he sees this all as sort of, oh, really? What you want is this, not the thing you say you want, but you want this other thing. Well, let me deliver it to you. There's a level where the eye collector is a sort of, from his point of view, he's, trying to help people. He's a hero. He's a father, taking care of his, children.
Creatively, one of the things we spent a lot of time doing, Barney, was talking about, do these characters mean what they say? Because the eye collector knows the difference between what they say and what they really want. And so how do we visually show that he's going to grant them what they want, regardless of what they're saying? And that was a lever that we used to move the story around into some really interesting places. We say that we want everyone to be safe and happy, but would we trade some of that if it meant we could have success and longevity and fame? The difficult question for a lot of people to look deep into.
So what would you say then for readers who might say, I don't usually read like weird comics. So what's your invitation into this one?
Well, the good news is there's hardly any words.
Yeah. Yeah, you can just decide what it means. My invitation for people who don't like weird comics is, some comics are weird simply to set themselves apart from mainstream storytelling. Our comic is a very straightforward story told in a weird fashion. Okay. It's a straightforward horror story. And if you come along for the ride, you can check back and say, is that really what's happening? Is that what they meant in issue 2? And you can compare the artwork. There's a real trick we do at one point where one character moves for the first time. And it's like a visual trick where we have introduced that character a number of times, and it's for the reader to recognize that panel is unchanging. And then later when we change it, you realize the spell has been broken. You can go back and check and be like, oh shit, that's been like that the whole time, right? I should have noticed. Those kinds of things we're doing that reward you for having picked up the book, reading it, and then return to it. I think every good comic, like real great comics that are trying to be more than just the medium, intend for you to read them more than once.
Yeah, I feel like when we try to make much of it being weird in a certain marketing way, but at a certain level, I don't find it that weird at all. Like it's, I think both not as weird as it seems. Like I would say that it is a truly weird book in the tradition of weird fiction, which is a definable horror genre that involves people like Lovecraft and so on. But it's a very weird book in that, technical, traditional sense of cosmic horror weirdness. It's also, I think, a weird book, relatively speaking, to a lot of other comics that are out on the stands right now. And I think it's just interesting in that way. But it's not weird for the sake of being weird. There's a certain surrealism involved, but it's still telling a very plain, straightforward, very traditionally structured story. My contention. I love David Lynch. We have a nod to David Lynch in this series at one point. Um, and what I always thought was great about Lynch was he understood completely. I think that you could, do anything you wanted on a surface level as long as you were attending to kind of deep structure and you were, satisfying the structure of a scene. If you look at Lynch's movies, every scene is perfect for the genre it is, and it makes perfect sense as a scene. And when you put the scenes side by side, they don't necessarily make as much sense anymore. The Eye Collector is not like that. It has more of a comprehensible story from issue to issue.
One thing I would say that I really like about what we figured out on the Eye Collector is I'm a big fan of rules in characters' visual powers and their power dynamic, particularly in comics. Like the most obvious direct example would be the Kirby crackle, right? When something crackles with that Kirby crackle, it's a cosmic level event, right? There's some big stuff happening. There's some real power going on there. So one of the things we did with the visual rules of the Eye Collector is we introduced them slowly. They build up. Those visual rules build up to a crescendo. And then they also become observable as a weakness to the very careful observations of one of the other characters. I'm trying not to spoil anything here. But that payoff where even the reader goes, oh, is that how his powers work? Is that what's happening? Can you do that? Can he always do that? Is the same time that a character is also realizing, if I could take that power, I could also do that.
That's a really excellent point, Gregory, too, because I think that the real difference between what I like to do and what, let's say, another writer who has similar tastes does, is I will push the weirdness to the absolute farthest place it can go, but I will also train the reader along the way.
Confirm.
So I'm very interested in training the reader. Like, I won't just throw them into a pit of vipers. I'll train them about how to handle a snake, and then I'll give them one snake, and then I'll give them a poisonous snake next, and then I'll put them in the pit of vipers. Do you know what I mean? Like, so by the time you're late in the Eye Collector and people are turning into metal spiders, it's not even weird to you anymore. It's like, oh, of course, she could be a metal spider as well. That makes sense. And visually, it's pulling back, a visual you've seen earlier and so on. So it is a book, I think, that rewards, your openness to going where it wants to go. But it's also a book that isn't just sort of dragging you along. It's kind of, presenting you with a path. And you may not completely know where you are, but you won't feel lost.
Trust it. It's also a book, I'll say, Barney, that we couldn't do. I mean, you could. I mean, you can do anything. All things are possible. But Eye Collector works best as 12 issues. Because I am mildly obsessed with the notion of semiotics, which, put very simply, is the way in which when an image is repeated, first it acquires value and then acquires meaning. So the more often you see something, you go, oh, that must have a value. I don't know what it means yet, but eventually it acquires meaning. And so over 12 issues, we're allowed to show some rules and show some repeated imagery and some repeated symbols that maybe you don't know what they mean, but they have a value before you understand their meaning. And I promise you their meaning is also coming if you just keep reading it.
Cool. Now, if people want to learn more about your works, where's the best place they could go to?
That's a good question, isn't it, Greg? I keep thinking I should have a better
GMB Chomichuk, the name is on the screen right here, I think. GMBchomichuk.ca is my website. And then Jonathan has a website over at strangerfiction.ca.
Or jonathanball.com, although all my stuff, I'm slowly updating these days. You could go to my site and not even know I wrote the iCollector, but I did. You know, iCollector.ca is always worth going to. Right now, it just sort of takes you to image, but it'll have more stuff on it around the iCollector as time goes on, and a bit more information about us.
They can also go to Super Pulp Science podcast, where we have a weekly podcast about how we make the stuff we make and why we make it and how we do it as a livelihood and all that entails. So we do that every week, reveal all our secrets. Cool. Okay. And then my name is very hard to spell and hard to remember, but that makes it infinitely Googleable because all the things related to me specifically show up there.
Right. Cool. Perfect, guys. Listen, you're going to have to come back on when you're working on another project together.
Well, we already are.
Yes.
So we'll schedule it as soon as
lots going on.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.